Alrighty, welcome everyone to Intersectionality and the Climate Crisis. I'm so happy to have everyone here today, and we are going to get started right now. Alrighty, so for this webinar, we just want to officially, before we begin, take a moment to acknowledge that the land that we are currently occupying, most of USL, myself included, are on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, which includes 66 different tribes. The land that's now called Whidbey Island belongs to the specifically Tulalip, Suquamish, Stillaguamish, and the Snohomish tribes who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. We specifically want to bring attention to the fact that the Snohomish tribe is not federally acknowledged by the United States government, despite years and many efforts on their part to get acknowledged. They've also not been listed as one of the tribes that has stewarded this land, now known as Whidbey Island. So please take this into consideration as we participate in the next part of the land acknowledgement. So I'm going to hopefully share out a link specifically to make certain that everyone here can participate in this. So give me 1 second. If everyone can go to that link, that would be great. I'm going to share the actual link in a second. But all participants here today and those at home, hopefully watching this recording, if you can go to nativeland.ca, there's a hyphen in the middle of that. We're asking that all participants here today take a minute to share out which land you are currently occupying. So when you do share that out, please include your name, your pronouns, your affiliations if you wish to share any, and also whose native land you are currently on. And while I kind of wait for everyone to go to that link and check out specifically where you are at and share that in the chat, we're going to go around as USL and share out specifically our name, our pronouns, any affiliations we'd like to share out, and then also any tribes land that we are currently on. And I think that I will go first. So my name is Maggie Natris. My pronouns are she, her, hers. My affiliations are with USL, Social Justice Club, Queer and Trans Club, the Climate Crisis Action Committee with the City of Langley. And I am currently, as I said earlier, on Tulalip, Suquamish, Stillaguamish, and Snohomish tribal lands, as well as the lands of the Coast Salish peoples. And I will pass it off to Jackson Murphy.
I'm Jackson Murphy, pronouns he, him, his, affiliated with USL, DSR, Queer and Trans Club, Ecology Club, other things. And I am on Snohomish and other Coastal Salish people's land. And I will pass it off to Maddie.
Hi, my name is Maddie Racico. I use she, her pronouns, and I am also occupying the land of the Coast Salish peoples here on Whidbey Island, as previously mentioned, and I will pass it off to Naomi.
Hi, my name is Naomi Atwood. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm affiliated with USL and ASB at the South Whidbey High School, and I am also currently occupying Snohomish and other Coastal Salish peoples' land. And I will pass it off to Derek.
Hi folks, my name is Derek Hoshiko. I use he, him pronouns. I'm affiliated with USL, E3 Washington, the South Whidbey Schools Foundation, Solidarity over Supremacy, and Repurpose. And I'm on occupied Snohomish land. And I'm not sure who's next, Maggie.
I think we're going to pass it off to speakers instead of going over other USL members. If any USL members want to participate in this as well, which you should, if you can put your details in the chat, that would be great. I'm going to pass it off to Kaya since I can see you currently.
My name is Kaya George. I am in Vancouver, BC, known as the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam Nations land, and my pronouns are she, they. I'll pass it to Zarna.
Hi, I'm Zana Joshi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently on Duwamish land and land also stewarded by other Coast Salish peoples.
Thank you for everyone who just checked in and those who are checking in the chat. Also a reminder to anyone in the chat who forgot to include pronouns, please do that. Before we officially jump into our next step, USL just wants to recognize that while we're not currently campaigning on the land back movement. We stand in solidarity with it, so it's important to recognize that land acknowledgements are only the very first step in reparations for what the United States and many other countries have done to the indigenous peoples of this land. And this is the bare minimum. So we encourage all of our supporters to go to the Land Back website, which I will put in the chat very shortly, to see how you can further support the movement yourselves. And that is now in the chat for anyone who would like to check that out. Alrighty, so for those of you who have been here before, which is almost all of you, you have heard this webinar protocol before, but for anyone who just entered or doesn't know, if you can have your camera on, that is greatly appreciated. Also making certain that your mic is muted throughout the webinar unless you specifically have a question or we call on you. Making certain that your name and pronouns are in your Zoom name is greatly important. And then also protocol if there's any disturbance. If anything disrupts this meeting, turn off your camera, probably mute your sound as well. And we will let you know when it's safe in the chat. But yeah, feel free to remove yourself from that situation. Alrighty, next slide. So who we are, who USL is. USL is a student-led and organized group. We're focused on a range of social justice issues, fighting the climate crisis, but also LGBTQIA+ rights. Black Lives Matter movement is something that we've also worked on. And throughout all of this, we are still educating ourselves and focusing on social justice movements and issues that the students are passionate about and wish to take action on. We originally started in 2019 and we have since stopped organizing specifically on the streets and moved online, specifically with the pandemic kind of forcing that change. And so far we have grown to the organization that you see today and have been communicating with supporters through social media and emails and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think that's the summary that I'll be able to get to today. For anyone who does not know, we have done quite a few past webinars and there no longer will be any future webinars. So that is exciting and also sad, but we've come pretty much full circle. We started off with the Patriarchy webinar series, which had 3 different webinars, the Discrimination webinar series, which also had 3 different webinars in it. And now we're finally on the Climate Crisis webinar series. Our first one was the Intro to the Climate Crisis. Second was Climate Politics Globally and Locally. And our third and final one, which we are now on, is Intersectionality and the Climate Crisis. So I'm so glad that everyone can make it here today. Next slide. So why are we are doing this series? Mostly to spread awareness about the climate crisis, also sharing its effects on our society and our future, and sharing ways to fight this crisis, but also we want to go beyond what Whidbey Island's perception of the climate crisis is. So that's kind of the main focus, especially of this webinar, but that's part of the reason why we originally started with the first 2, Patriarchy and Discrimination. We want to go past just the climate crisis and take a look at how other issues impact it and look at how intersectionality is vital to fighting this crisis. And with that, I believe I am passing it over to Jackson.
Thank you. Okay, so we just wanted to do a trigger warning before we begin. So if you are part of a marginalized community or a community that might be affected, or if you've experienced some of the things that we're going to be talking about in relation in this webinar, if you feel triggered and you just want to leave, it's totally fine. We'll talk to you after the meeting and just like put yourself first. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Okay. Privilege check. So this is kind of like the flip side of the coin. If you're not a part of a marginalized community and you feel challenged or uncomfortable by some of the things we're talking about, we encourage you to sit in that uncomfortability and try to learn. And before you speak, acknowledge your privilege in yourself and your bias so that you don't offend anyone. Yeah. Okay. And next slide, please. This is just a quick review of intersectionality and the climate crisis before we get more into it. So intersectionality is recognizing the systems of power and oppression do not operate independently and separately from one another. It's centering the voices of people whose social identities overlap and create compounding experiences of discrimination. And some may not think that this is applicable to the climate crisis, but systems of discrimination cause the unequal effect of the climate crisis on marginalized communities. And we cannot stop the climate crisis without an intersectional approach, which is something we've run into in the past. And this brings up the topic of environmental justice. So environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, or income, with respect to development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And this sub-movement of the environmental movement understands the intersectionality of the climate crisis. And the only way to stop the climate crisis is to also work on race issues as well. And if you want to know more about this and the individual intersections and individual examples, we have that in the Intro to the Climate Crisis webinar, which is on YouTube. And I'll put a link in the chat in just a second. And I'll pass it off to Naomi and Maddie, or actually, not yet. We have a reflection. Okay. So what are some intersections? What are some intersectional ways to approach the climate crisis? So we're just gonna do a short brainstorm around this, and then we can put it in the chat. When we say we're gonna do a waterfall chat, so just type it in, but don't push enter, and I'll tell you when. Okay, you can push enter now. Okay, I'm gonna read some of them. Address inequalities in housing, addressing the root causes of homelessness. Number one, talk about it, stop flying for fun, and then talk about why. Countries that pollute and the most pay, the most change. Thinking of people who cannot afford housing in areas that will not be drastically affected by the climate crisis, therefore will face health concerns and lose their home due to climate. Center the voices of communities most impacted by the climate crisis when crafting policy change. Creating affordable housing powered by renewable clean energy. Create open questions and honor each voice. Restore voting rights for POC. Recognizing the prevalence of environmental racism. Recognize the people who have been most affected by the climate crisis and work to uplift their voices. And addressing the lack of opportunity for millions of potentially brilliant minds and possible solutions they can come up with. Okay. Thank you all. Okay, I'm seeing one more. War/militarization cause emphasis on fossil fuel and drains resources for greening. Okay, we're just gonna end it there in the time. And now I will actually pass it off to Maddie and Naomi for the just transition.
All right, so for this portion of the webinar, I'm just gonna give a brief overview of what the just transition is. So there are three main components of the just transition: the principle, the process, and the practice. The main idea is that we don't leave anyone behind as we seek to achieve an environmentally sustainable economy. So the principle piece is that simultaneously we can create a clean environment and a healthy economy. And the process is achieving this vision without sacrificing the well-being of workers and communities. It should not cost anyone their health, environment, jobs, or economic assets. And finally, the practice portion is centering the voices of people most affected by the climate crisis when crafting policy solutions. And it also ensures that communities of color, Indigenous communities, and frontline communities are not left behind in any way. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to briefly explain this graphic that kind of gives the main ideas of the just transition. So the premise is that we need to shift from our current extractive economy to a regenerative economy. The extractive economy is centered around extracting natural resources from the earth, burning them, and dumping that waste back into the environment, because every aspect of that process increases the harm on the environment. The next section of the economy we look at is worldview, and you can see these on the left side of the slide. The current world lens is a colonial mindset, which is the internalized attitude of ethnic or cultural inferiority felt by people as a result of colonization. And colonization jump-started the second driving factor of our economy, which is consumerism. Vast colonies allowed for large markets of people in which products could be sold to. So consumerism, which is basically buying a bunch of stuff that we don't need, really flourished here. And all of that ultimately contributes to harming the environment as well, because of all the excess stuff that needs to be made and then is eventually disposed of into landfills. Another component that is important to note is governance on the bottom here. The government right now is based on militaristic ideals by building up armed forces and acting aggressively towards other countries, which is not going to help us come to a solution as a global society. And the result of all these factors of an extractive economy is an extreme concentration of wealth and power, which creates a cycle that is extremely hard to break out of. So a regenerative economy on the right side of the slide here shifts each of these aspects to be more sustainable. And we need to shift our resource use to regenerative agriculture, energy, and land use, as well as the right to food, water, air, and land for all people. The worldview needs to be focused on caring for others and the environment. We need to prioritize rights and equality for all people. And then the government mindset and motivation should be deeply rooted in democracy, and decisions should be made based on what is best for the people and the well-being of society, not kind of money and power. These factors would lead to an economy that promotes ecological and social well-being within the society. So to do this is extremely complicated, and there are many steps that need to be taken. So first off, we need to stop with the bad and at the same time build the new. So for example, we need to start lowering fossil fuel use while at the same time building new renewable energy sources, because the switch can't just happen overnight. We also need to make decisions based on what is best for people and the earth, and not based on money and power, which is the current values filter of the world. So this means drawing money and power down from the international government to the national level, and most importantly to local communities who are being most impacted. And those voices need to be centered in the just transition fight. So this is a really complex system, and this graphic, I think, does a really good job at helping kind of understand and grasp some of these ideas. But I hope that this has helped you better understand what the just transition is trying to accomplish. So now I'm going to pass it off to Maddie, who is going to explain how we can start implementing just transition policies.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, so as she mentioned, I'm just going to kind of go into a little bit more of the specifics of how we can actually implement these policies to make that change towards a regenerative economy. So one of the main reasons why the just transition is such an effective approach is because it addresses the impact that divesting from the fossil fuel industry will have on workers. And I would say that that's one of the major sources of like political resistance when it comes to passing climate policies, because everyone's like, oh, well, how will this hurt the economy? How will the workers handle the workers in the fossil fuel industry? So as Naomi mentioned, the just transition seeks to protect workers as well as youth and marginalized communities as we transition to a regenerative economy. And so I'm just going to finish this by discussing how these just transition policies can make sure that no one is left behind. So the first step is to identify the impacted communities and include them in the discussion. And also including communities that will be impacted by future effects of this transition. So these communities should be included when developing strategies because to ensure that people in positions of power are taking into account intersecting social issues such as race and class and gender. I could go on. Next, it's important to remember that workers and even entire communities are reliant upon the fossil fuel industry, and unless protective policies are put in place, they'll face unemployment, falling incomes, and other issues, which is why corporations, as well as the local, state, and federal governments have to commit to providing social protections such as like skills training, pensions, and early retirement for those workers to help them smoothly transition. Providing job opportunities in green industries is also crucial, especially for BIPOC people who already are facing systemic economic oppression. And then the next step, obviously, is to generate funds because this is not going to be cheap. And as Naomi mentioned, it is important to shift our values filter to understand that, like, yes, it's expensive, but this is the price that has to be paid for our future. However, if done effectively, the cost of transitioning to a regenerative economy can actually be kept relatively low because investing in clean energy will actually result in more new jobs and more economic growth than what will be lost in divesting from the fossil fuel industry. Local, state, and federal governments will need to provide funds as well as pass legislation preventing unsustainable environmental practices and requiring corporations to invest in a regenerative economy. There's a lot more intricacies and complex, more specific policies regarding financing this transition. And I actually found a really great article that kind of goes more into depth in that. So I will put that in the chat as soon as I'm done if you want to check that out a little bit more. So the next step is to take legislative action. And when doing this, we must first and foremost call upon our government to protect the rights of Indigenous people and honor their connection to this land. We must also hold the government accountable in protecting BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ people and also people living in poverty, anyone who is most impacted by the effects of the climate crisis. Many of these people are also at risk of assault and trafficking associated with the fossil fuel industry, especially Indigenous women. And I have some articles about that too, if anyone else is interested. So in order to achieve a just and equitable transition to a regenerative economy, our state and federal government needs to provide funds and guarantee a living wage, jobs, and safe, affordable housing, as well as comprehensive, affordable healthcare. And on the state and local level, we must invest in sustainable industries, and then also like zero emission transportation, clean energy in government-owned buildings, and further environmental conservation. And I think that passing specific legislative policies to ensure this is important because otherwise people will keep dodging these demands. Prison labor is also, it should be outlawed for many ethical reasons, including the fact that it's often used for mining, logging, and other exploitative practices. And then another important step is to work together with other nations to acknowledge and accept climate refugees who have been displaced by natural disasters and other consequences of the climate crisis. A more comprehensive list of calls to action can be found in the 0 Hour Just Transition document, which I actually got a lot of this information from, and I believe Zarna actually worked on that, so I will put that into the chat as well. It does a really great job of laying out sort of a plan in many different areas. Lastly, we need to focus on intersectional solutions, which is kind of what the whole webinar is about. As mentioned by Jackson, actually everyone in this webinar, it's impossible to solve the climate crisis without addressing other social justice issues. Systems of oppression such as the patriarchy, racial discrimination, LGBTQIA+ discrimination, the prison pipeline, class issues, they will all continue to perpetuate the climate crisis unless we simultaneously take action towards resolving those issues as well. And I think that that's pretty much all for my section. I will put those resources in the chat. I just need to find them really quick, but I think I'm passing it off to Maggie.
Yeah, we're going to quickly go over any questions that anyone has, specifically both about the just transition, if anyone has specifics they want to go over, and also Jackson's part, if anyone needs clarification about past things that we have done. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, just because I can't see everyone all at once right now. And I'll leave we're going to do 2 minutes for anyone to put questions in the chat, and then hopefully for us to answer said questions, since we are running a bit low on time. And Maddie, thank you for putting those resources in the chat. I encourage everyone here to please check those out. Alrighty, Gary says, what role does a fee of carbon play in the action plan? I don't know if anyone wants to specifically answer this, or if someone does have an answer.
I think I can kind of touch on this a little bit. I think in order to make this equitable and achievable for all people, it's important to have in place affordable clean energy before we can start or to at least begin providing affordable clean energy, because a fee on carbon will impact lower income, poor communities. And so, yeah, I think working on green energy infrastructure is important as we apply those. But I do think that a fee on carbon would be extremely effective as part of the just transition. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that, Maddie. Alrighty, I'm going to assume that there are no other questions. If you have more, we can definitely get to it at the end of this webinar. But with that, I think we're going to jump into the intersectionality panel. So I think I'm going to spotlight USL members and presenters for the sake of making it easier for everyone here, or at least me personally. But I now have to figure out how to do that. So give me a second. And Derek, if you have any ideas how to do that, that'd also be helpful.
Yeah, Maggie, I'll spotlight the panelists if you want to go ahead and get started.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so we're gonna do pretty much a fishbowl. So anyone who wants to comment, you're welcome to, but just know that we're not going to be addressing probably any of those questions until later, unless a presenter does want to get to it now. And we do have some time set aside at the end of this webinar for everyone to ask questions. But basically, to start off, Zarna and Kaya, thank you both so much for being here. I greatly appreciate both of you being able to join us. And I'm just going to start off with our first question. And if you want to go into a little bit more detail about who you are before you jump in, you're welcome to. But why did you get involved in the climate movement, and what motivates you to keep going? Okay, Zarna, you're being gestured to, but you gestured as well. So how about you just go first?
Okay, I will go ahead. Thank you, Kaya. Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Shri Krishna Sharanam Mama. Shri Krishna Sharanam Mama. Shri Krishna Sharanam Mama. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for the panel. And I also want to congratulate the youth for the brilliant education that they just shared with us collectively. Thank you, that was fantastic. Really, really awesome work. So the question is, what drives me, right? Like, what motivates me? So I am Indigenous Indian Hindu. And I was raised in a very indigenous Indian Hindu way, even though I was raised in the West. And the reason why I'm in the West, in a land that is not indigenous to me, is because of my family and my people's colonial trauma. And so because I was raised in a very indigenous way, indigenous to my people, I was taught that not only was our land sacred, but all of Mother Earth was sacred. And all the water was sacred, and all the sky was sacred, and every tree was sacred. I was taught it was a sin to cut trees. I was taught that all life is sacred. I was raised vegetarian because of that, because that is a particular indigenous Hindu teaching that we don't eat animals specifically for that reason, that we see all life in everyone, and in particular animals. We don't want to harm them, and we want to lessen our impact on Mother Earth. And because we want to lessen our impact on her, we try to take as little from her as possible. And we see life in all of the plants as well. But if you want to protect plants, the worst thing you could do would be to eat meat, because in order to raise cattle, you have to cut down forests. So it doesn't help plants to eat meat, is what my people taught me. And so because of that, because I was raised with all of those values, environmental issues was always a central part of my value system, because that's how I lived. That's how I was taught. In my community, before we perform any ceremony, or in any ceremony, we first, offer prayers to the divine feminine. And in that, we offer prayers to Mother Earth, right? If you've ever watched any traditional classical types of Indian dancing, which is traditional classical Hindu dancing, you'll notice that the first thing that they do is offer a prayer to Mother Earth by saying, we're sorry that we're stamping on you, right? It's like, we don't mean to harm you. In fact, by doing this, we are trying to worship you. And so what I was taught is that whatever you do, make it an act of service to Mother Earth. And as I grew up, learning about the impacts that Western culture was having on the earth, and realizing that those impacts were having such a far-reaching, devastating impact that it was actually threatening life itself. It was threatening not only, the human species, but all species. It was threatening the water, it was threatening the sky. Realizing that had a huge impact on me when I was a child. Learning about all of the species that were going extinct. What I found out when I learned about how tigers were endangered, this is when I was 8 years old, and I learned that tigers were endangered. Since then, the Indian government has done a lot of work, to protect them, and they've been coming back. But when I learned about that, I started looking into it, and I found out that the only place outside of Africa that lions exist is in India, in the state of Gujarat, where my people come from, and in particular, the mountain where my family goddess temple is. The reason why that's the only place outside of Africa where lions exist is because my Hindu ancestors gave their lives to defend her from colonizers. In fact, it was the colonizers who were wiping out species all over the world, including in our land. And they were doing it by cutting down forests, by hunting species, by overfishing, by doing all of these things that were so devastating. And part of that whole process is the fossil fuel industry. So as I grew up and as I learned all of these facts, and as I saw the wider far-reaching effects of capitalism, understanding that my own people were environmental and economic refugees, understanding all of those things led me towards understanding that I must take action. And I don't want to take too much time, but I've probably taken too much time, so I'll stop there.
No, thank you so much, Sarna, for sharing that. And I know that that is incredibly personal to you. I can hear it in your voice. So thank you. And it is greatly appreciated. Kaya, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Hotskoil Tanoya Paflia Queen Kushomain,
Kai George Queensna, Tanachinkla, the Hlelip, Tanachinkla Slewatu, a snitch, Glustan Man, it's a I just said in my traditional language, I said hello. So if you'd all repeat after me and say that back, no, I'm just kidding. That's a long introduction. My name is Kaya George. I come from Tsleil-Waututh Nation and Tulalip tribes. My father's Skloos and my mother's Sitsalta. And those are my being and part of who I am. And that's the way I was taught to introduce myself whenever I go speak, especially for our land and for our waters. So it started for me, the environmental fight started for me when I was 11 years old. I remember my dad coming to me, and we've always held the land and water really sacred to us, and it's something I grew up believing in and knowing. But it got really real for us when I was around 11 or 12, and my dad came to me and my family and said they want to put a pipeline through many people's territories, and they want to end it in our territory. It's called the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And they say this is going to be good for the economy. They say this is going to bring us a lot of money, and they say they're going to put this through. And we looked at all of the facts. We looked at all of the impacts that this could have, not only in our community, but all of the communities around us, and not only our people currently, but our people yet to come. And for all these reasons and many more, it was 100% consensus no for my community. And since then, not only did we say no, but we ended up starting a huge campaign against the Trans Mountain Pipeline to show and advocate for ourselves, advocate for our community, advocate for the animals, the orca whales, and a lot of the marine life that live in that water, but also for the water itself. And when people ask, because my nation's only a nation of about 500, just over 500 people. At the time of contact, it was around 20,000 on both sides of the inlet, and at one point wiped out to 13 people. And so the 500 of us are the descendants of those 13. And it's wild to think about how much effort was put into erasing our culture. And yet the little bit of culture, and it's a lot more than we've known. There's a lot more of our culture and a lot more of our songs and traditions and laws to be heard and told by our elders. But that little bit that we were able to preserve is what's kind of saving a lot of humanity right now. That belief that we have to uphold and live in reciprocity with the planet and live in reciprocity with our environment around us. Those are concepts that at the beginning, when we tried to share them many decades ago, was seen as crazy. Like, how could we possibly hurt the earth? And that was seen as really like, it wasn't looked at the way it is now. And now we see that our impacts are huge when we take something from the earth. It affects the next couple generations, and that's every time we take something, our people try and consider how this is going to affect the next 7 generations down the line. And so I always go back to my spiritual law and my sacred law when I go speak somewhere, or when I campaign, or when I do anything. And for us, for the Tsleil-Waututh people, the inlet that we're trying to protect from the Trans Mountain Pipeline that comes from the Alberta tar sands, which is some of the dirtiest oil and one of the biggest industrial projects on the planet. The reason we're fighting so hard, such a small nation against at one point, such a huge energy company, Kinder Morgan, multi-billion-dollar energy company, but in 2017, they dropped the pipeline because of public backlash, and was so massive. So that was a huge win for us. But unfortunately, Canada, Trudeau bought the pipeline. So now we're fighting against Canada, and it was a win, then like a huge upset and disappointment. And people constantly ask, why do you fight so hard for so long, use so many resources for this water? And we say, because it's our oldest grandmother. Because I was taught through a creation story
that our grandmother walked out of the ocean and taught our people how to live in reciprocity, and that when the tide is out, the table is set, and that's where I feel most cared for, and that's where I feel most nourished, and that's where I feel most at home. It's our home. It's the most sacred place on earth. It's who we are. Tsleil-Waututh literally translates to people of the inlet. It's our identity, and so that's why we would do anything, and that's why we fight so hard, and that's what led me to this fight, and that's what led me to continue this fight for over half my life, and that's what will keep me going throughout for the rest of my life and for many generations to come, having those traditions and having those sacred laws in mind, and showing and teaching them to our allies. I find that that's what makes us strong, and that's what makes us feel home, and that's what gives us that connection and that love for the ocean and that love for the water. Yes, that's how I got involved.
Thank you so much for sharing as well. And thank you for sharing that background, that history that's so incredibly important. And I definitely hope that those here today can acknowledge just how important that is. And also the commonality in the stories that you two just shared, I think is something that's incredibly important to recognize. I know that the stories that the students will hopefully share after this, even though both of those are incredibly hard to follow up, will also shed a light on kind of the differences between what we're taught in this very colonial, very white island that we live on, but that we do share similarities as well. Does one of the USL members here want to share out how they got involved as well?
I could start, though it is very hard to follow up that. So thank you both for sharing those two stories. I really appreciate that and that knowledge. I have always cared deeply about the environment. One of my favorite places is the beach at Double Bluff, and just going for really, really long walks for hours. It's like one of my favorite things to do. And I think for me, the climate crisis has always sounded so hard to fight. And in school, we didn't talk about it that much, but at home we did. And so kind of just like, it just seemed so big and so scary. And so once I joined USL, I realized that there are things we can do, even though we're young and even though we're so few, and even though we aren't going to impact the global like scale of things, we can start here and we can start local. And we're changing things at our school, in our city, and hopefully soon in our county. So just doing what you can where you can, because I really love this earth and I don't like the changes that I'm seeing in our ecosystems on the island and throughout the world, and just doing what you can where you can. So it's just realizing that everyone can do something.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jackson. And I'm assuming I'll see some similar things coming up when Maddie and Naomi share, but do one of you want to jump in?
Sure, I can speak a little bit. So I was really lucky to have parents also that educated me from a young age on the impacts of the climate crisis. And it's always kind of been like more of like a fear, like this nagging fear in the back of my mind. And as Jackson said, it's always just seemed like this overwhelming thing. And I think that that's a similar feeling shared by many youth who are faced with this like issue that just seems impossible, and it's kind of been dumped on us. And so I think I didn't really get involved in the climate movement until I joined USL. And I think the main reason for that was because I just didn't feel like anything I would do would matter. And that's why I think like these types of youth-led organizations are really important, because they give people a direction and something to do. And yeah, it's also intimidating seeing the things that like they're incredible activists setting aside like our two guest speakers here today. But I think it's important to remember too that everyone has their own journey towards and their own gifts to bring to the climate movement, and you don't have to feel bad about not doing as much or not doing it in the same way as someone else. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Maddie, for sharing and also tying that back in. I think that's a great outlook on how we can all chip in our own ways. Naomi, are you comfortable sharing out a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. And I definitely have very similar connections to Maddie and Jackson and what they've shared. I think that like I definitely didn't get started in the climate action until really pretty recently, like when I joined USL, and I kind of watched what was possible and the change that had already been made. And I was like, you know, wow, like I can actually do something. I can change the outcome of my future, because it is grim to look and feel like as a youth that you're just kind of like watching this like world in front of you kind of fall apart. And so I think it was really powerful to see that, oh no, like people like me and like I can see that they have made change, and what I do and where I join can make a difference. And like I'm gonna be stuck on this earth, or not stuck, but I'm going to get to live here for like the rest of my life, and I want to do the most I can to make it like the best future possible for me and future generations to come. And I think that like whenever I am doing things, I definitely think about that a lot. Like, how can I make this a better place for my future and for future generations? Because this is all we've got.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for sharing, and everyone else as well. One of the ties and connections I'm seeing is families and what they teach their children having an incredibly important impact on the people here today. And I definitely personally agree with that. I grew up learning about what was going on in the world and learning about the atrocities that were done to it. And I think that's part of the reason why it was so important for me to get involved, and that seems to be reflected in our guests here today. I think something that we should jump into next are kind of the intersections and kind of intersectionality as a lens on the climate crisis. So how those are important to making certain that we get those solutions out there and are able to change the world and make an impact on this really large issue. So I'm going to read out this question verbatim, and then Zarna and Kaya specifically, I think this is addressed to you two, but what are some intersections and oppressions that you have experienced and or noticed in the movement and beyond? Kaya, you're being gestured to, so I think you might want to go first for this one.
Some intersections and oppressions I've witnessed within the movement itself. It's really interesting because I kind of like started quite young and have seen sort of this progression. I've seen it change so much in the past 10 years. Like, there's been such a massive shift, and I think in realizing like what's being spoken about now, it's kind of an issue because that wasn't spoken about earlier. Like intersectionality, the fact that it wasn't spoken about earlier was kind of like people weren't really realizing that, and sometimes people weren't really making space for that at all to discuss racism within like environmental actions or environmental like movements. And I think that's like an issue, and I'm glad that's being addressed now. Just like the lack of voicing that. And for me, Indigenous rights are really directly intertwined with the environmental movement, especially if you live on stolen land like the US or Canada. So it's hard not to bring that up and to think of for how long that really wasn't brought up. It's like it's eye-opening. And for there to be discomfort where people are like, oh, you know, I'm an environmentalist, but I don't really know much about racism. I don't really know about much about like other social issues. And I'm like, well, you have to, because it's all connected. It's all deeply, deeply connected. And so it was all, for me, a lot of the issue was more of what isn't and what wasn't being said than like what is, and what isn't being made like space for. So that's something that's I've seen quite a bit of change in, and people are sort of realizing, like from a moral standpoint, that it's good to, and you should recognize Indigenous people, because when it comes to, oh, we're fighting for this land, whose land? You know, that's a question that gets neglected very often. It doesn't sound right, especially when you're standing on top of like massive grave sites of Indigenous people, to be like, oh, this land, you know. So that's something really important to always address. And even when you look at solutions, like morally, it's the right thing to do to recognize that, but also strategically. A lot of Indigenous rights here in Vancouver, it's unceded territory, meaning there isn't treaties being signed. And even treaties have rights that can guarantee them control of lands and can stop certain projects from going through. And Tsleil-Waututh, the little bit of rights they have, like I said, stopped a huge pipeline in many corporations, and made a huge energy company, Tsleil-Waututh and many allies, stopped a huge energy company from wanting to build a pipeline to these territories. So strategically, that's something really important to consider. And I feel like racism often gets in the way of people considering that, looking towards Indigenous people and people of color and hearing their voices. And kind of, so it's more so like a neglect of hearing really important voices from different diverse backgrounds. And acknowledging that our diversity is such a strength within the movement. When I ask sometimes, what's your favorite part of the movement? People will say the community. And that's, I agree, the environmental community, it's grown so much. And just reflecting on a lot of the growth that I've seen, and always making sure that there's space and there's time to discuss many other issues going on in the world, because it's so connected through, you know, the big, you know, capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. Those are so intertwined. When you look at a lot of movements, and somebody asked me recently, what do you think is like the strongest movement, or something around what's your favorite movement? I was like, I don't know how to answer that, because I think they're all so intertwined. Solidarity is huge, like and I think it's super necessary. So yeah, that's some examples that I've witnessed some more intense ones too, I'm trying to think of, but for me it was a lot of what wasn't being said that almost like hurt me more, you know, the lack of acknowledgement too, and the lack of like, okay, maybe these people, Indigenous people and people of color and people from different walks of life, have a lot to say and a lot to contribute to. That was, so yeah, that was my take.
Thank you so much for that. And yeah, no, even though I've only been in this for like maybe 2 years, I'm seeing some of the same things that you are, probably not to the same extent that you have. And yeah, I hope we're all continuing to acknowledge those unspoken things and bring them forward even more, because there are still things we need to discuss further. Sarna, do you want to jump in as well?
Thank you. And yeah, I feel that so much, Kaya, like for real, it's so deep. It's always what's not said that hurts the most, always. Keeping in mind that intersectionality, as Kimberly Crenshaw defined it, is talking about how different systems of oppression are experienced differently by people according to their identities in various different ways. And the ways that they experience those systems of oppression is the intersectional oppression that is their unique experience. So as a brown woman, as a woman, as a brown woman, as a young brown woman, as an immigrant brown woman who is also in a settler, colonial, imperialist nation on stolen native land, who is also able-bodied, college educated, and who was born in the global north, understanding those things, I have a particular experience of being marginalized in various ways and being empowered in various ways. One of the things that I have experienced and witnessed is how the voices of the global south are just totally ignored. Totally 100% ignored. And in particular, my people are ignored. And in particular amongst Indians, who are all my people, but in particular within those, my people, the Hindus, are ignored. Entirely ignored. We're not even acknowledged at all in any way, even though all of these, all of these environmentalists are doing yoga classes, which is culturally appropriated, stolen Hindu knowledge. So not only are they appropriating all of our practices for their healing, spoiler alert, culturally appropriated indigenous practices will not heal you. They will only turn you into spiritual narcissists who spiritually bypass and commit atrocities that go on and on and on and on and on. You don't even realize the impacts of the atrocities of what you're doing because you don't realize that cultural appropriation is a foundational tactic of imperialism, which is why all indigenous people experience this pain, and it hurts so much more when no one mentions it. So that's something that I've noticed. Another thing that I've noticed is the fact that the systematic oppression of children is ignored, even though children are the ones who are going to have to deal with the continued devastation of our environment and the mass extinction that we are all plunging headlong in a continued downward slide towards. But one thing that's really important to understand about the systemic oppression of children, as I said, when I was talking about cultural appropriation, you cannot control a piece of land without controlling the children, because the children are the next generation. So if you don't sufficiently torture them and indoctrinate them and terrorize them and harm them and have them living in such a state of fear and anxiety that they're paralyzed, that they don't know their own people's practices, that they do not know how to connect with their ancestors, that they don't know their own language, etc., etc., etc. If they can't do any of those things, they cannot defend themselves. And they cannot defend the land and the water. That is something that I have seen not only as a brown Hindu girl growing up as an immigrant in the global north, but as someone who is now an adult mentoring youth and trying to help them and trying to help them learn the tools that they need in order to defend themselves against this relentless cycle of abuse. That is something that I have seen and experienced and witnessed over and over and over again, is this systemic oppression of children and the ignorance with which it is just completely passed over that, oh, they're kids, they don't need to speak. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they absolutely do.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And also for tying back in, I think you brought up earlier generational trauma, right? That generational continuation that ties into all of this. It's brought up, it's been brought up by both of you, indirectly or not, that it's perpetuating this problem that we are continuing to see. The fact that all of this is happening again and again, and we cannot stop it if we do not look at all of this through that lens. Thank you also, Zarna, for bringing up, I think, the viewpoint of intersectionality, seeing it through your own eyes and various other people's eyes and through various other lenses. I think that was something that was skipped over at the beginning, but it's incredibly important, both in this room, but also just in our lives in general, to continue to bring that forward in the work that we do. So thank you also for bringing that up.
Thank you. One thing that I forgot to mention just in that, and some people have mentioned it in the chat as well, is, you know, these tactics of imperialism, one of those tactics is endless war. Endless war, because you cannot have an ever expanding empire without endless war. It runs on war, it is funded by war, and that war devastates Mother Earth. And that war is going to devastate children over and over and over again. And that is part of the continuous intergenerational trauma. And we see it happening right now over and over and over again, because it's been happening over and over and over again for generations.
Loops and cycles and patterns of this, both trauma and just continued, I guess, unbroken patterns of violence. And I don't know, it's such a big topic. It's so hard to cover in just this one area when we only have so much limited time, but it's so incredibly important to recognize. So thank you so much for doing that. I know that the next section, I think, Kaya, that you wanted to talk to specifically is how we can bring our own gifts and our own passions into saving the planet. And I think that ties back into that kind of lens of intersectionality, bringing your own focus in. So if you'd like to expand on that, then I would greatly appreciate that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Maddie that said earlier, like, you could bring your own passion and your own, it doesn't matter like how much you contribute, you could bring it to the movement. I think that was really well said. And I want to start off with one of my favorite quotes by Tony Cade Bambara. It's the artist's job to make the revolution irresistible. And I love that. And I heard that about a year ago, and I really wanted to embody that as I wanted to look at this movement in different ways and see how people can get involved and bring their gifts forward. And so I ended up making a short film on my connection to the water and to the inlet, and just to be able to show that in a different way that was actually really healing and energizing. I find that there's different ways of existing within the environmental community. Some can be tiring, and they could be worth it too, definitely, if it's tiring, but also some things can be really, really energizing and invigorating, and that, like, oh, that really got me going. And I see that within a lot of people. There was this action that I seen downtown where people had like a dance party in the middle of the street, in the middle of this, they blocked off the intersection. They're like, oh my god, they're gonna do something super radical, and they kind of did. They blocked off the entire like intersection, and then everybody just played this like really like loud speaker, and it was just, they were like, the public was kind of thrown off. They're like, oh, okay, and everybody started dancing. It was really cool. And of course, there's not always going to be a time for dancing. Some things are a bit more serious, but that was really fun. I think we had all wanted a bit of a break, and we're like, okay, this is it. This is what we're doing right now. People were like singing out Queen, like we will be champions. So it was amazing. And then there's also times for more serious actions when a lot of people's lives are at stake. So the diversity of tactics is, I think, how we're going to win, and the diversity of people from all different walks of life. I think that's how we're going to end up saving, you know, my water and many other people's territories, and ultimately the planet, is just by bringing your gifts forward and bringing your passion into the movement, and bringing your yourself and your own gifts. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. I see some people are like, and there was another example I think of, there was these elderly women, they're like, what can we do? Like, we this hurts us to see this planet's dying. We want to do something. We want to leave the next couple generations with something. We want them to see the world that, like, how we did. We don't want to see them to see a wasteland. We want to help. And they ended up coming together and making an event where they would just walk their dogs in front of the trucks. And not everybody can participate in civil disobedience, but for those that can and have the privilege of being able to, if you're not a person of color, not facing violence or violent arrest, then it's something that you can do. I'm not going to endorse that for sure, but whatever you can. They just walk their dogs in front of the trucks coming in to bring pipes for the construction of the pipeline. And it was something really simple. It was really simple. and it totally made a difference. There's like people, it was spreading on social media. People were like, wow, that's really cool. And even some people, a lot of artists, I see draw paintings of one, had just a lot of infographics, but also what they embodied, and they painted how they felt about their connection to the land, to the water, and just bringing awareness from all different directions. Because I know if enough people know about it and enough people feel what I feel, what all of you feel, if you're here today, you're doing something, you're learning, and you're talking about this. I find if enough people know about it, they'll care too. And so people just need to know, and bringing that attention and bringing that forward, and using a diversity of tactics and using your own gift, your own voice. And I think that's a really beautiful way to go about it, and using your own strength too. And especially, there's a lot of young people here too, and don't ever think you're too young to speak up, because you're not. I think it's a really profound, it's a really beautiful thing for people to speak, young people to speak up about your future, our future. I find that a lot of people tend to listen more. This is something my dad always says. He's like, I'm getting older. He's like, but when I see a young person come up on stage, it gives me hope. And I think it gives the older generations hope as well. So yeah, you're giving hope to people when you come and speak and show up. Yeah, and bring whatever gift you have, bring whatever tactic, bring whatever you know, whatever knowledge, whatever you have, and whatever you feel like you can contribute. I think, yeah, that's how we're gonna win.
Thank you so much for sharing out those stories. And I think that definitely ties back into what was talked about earlier too, like those cycles, right, that we're stuck in. Like the only way to then break those cycles isn't to use the same tactics that have been used for years by the people who have been given the most voice. It's using just any tactic you can to try to make an impact, to break through, to try to shift that cycle and undo that damage. So thank you so much for sharing out about that. And we are going to wrap up today with the last question, which is probably going to end up being closer to 6:30 than I want it to be. But I'm going to go to probably a couple youth first, just to give both of you a quick break before we jump into your solutions. But any youth who wants to speak out, you're welcome to. What solutions do you envision for a cleaner and sustainable future? And I will call on people if I have to.
I think that kind of the principles of the just transition, as we discussed earlier, I think that is a really, really effective way to address the climate crisis. I think it's a hard question to really get into and explain all the complexities, because this is something that's impacting every single person on this planet, and everyone is impacted in different ways. And as is stated in the principles of the just transition, like, it's hard to make this equitable and to uplift everyone as we transition. But yeah, that's pretty much it that I have to say. Sorry, I can't provide more.
Right. Yeah, it's hard, but it's necessary. Thank you for including that. Jackson, do you want to go?
Sure. I was going to kind of say the same thing, the just transition. That's why we felt it was important to share. And I think that just making this an opportunity, seeing this as an opportunity to do better in a plethora of ways instead of just one way. And I think just using it as a solution for so many other problems, which I just said and restated. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackson. Naomi, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, so I think that, Maddie and Jackson mentioned this transition, and also just kind of bringing it back to everyone giving what they can. And like, if we all collectively as a society each bring our own part to like fighting the climate crisis, and we each bring our own like ways, like our own like individual things we're going to do every day, besides like all of the, or as well as all of like the global legislative action and stuff. I think that all of that together makes a difference. Like if we can come as a society to this agreement that things need to change and we need to like change our future, then you know, we can really make something happen. So yeah, that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing out. Zarna, do you want to go first?
Thank you. I would encourage everyone to look at the 0 Hour platform. We shared the Just Transition part of that earlier. Maddie shared that. This link that I'm going to put in the chat, this is like the whole platform. So there's the Just Transition platform, and then there's the Letter to Politicians, and then there's the People's platform. And so there's different parts of it because it's explaining how different people, according to their privileges, according to where they're at, what they can do. And so I really encourage you to go and look at that, because there are really clear-cut like things that you can just, you know, if you don't have too much time, pick one and run with it, you know. And if you've got more time to dedicate, like, you know, there are so many ways in which you can really, really make a difference without realizing that you're making a difference. Another thing that I'll say is, if we don't stop war, it won't matter what we do right here in this country. If we don't stop war, because the US military is the largest polluter in the entire world. So if we don't stop war of this country, but imperialism in general worldwide, if we don't stop it, there's no future. And this is something that's not said enough, right? Imperialism is a killer. It has always been a killer. I do a presentation on imperialism where I talk about how the tactics of ancient Rome we use today. And in fact, ancient Rome was devastating their environment exactly the same way we are. They went around everywhere they went, they cut down the forests. You know why? Because it was their fuel. It was their fuel to make their weapons, to make their currency, money, and war. And it's been the same the whole time. If we were ruled by Rome right now, they would be the ones burning the most fossil fuels. Right? So this is a real like imperative, critical piece that isn't talked about enough in the climate movement, because, you know, we tend to focus on like domestic things, which of course we must do 100%. We have to do all the things that we can do right here. And one of the things that we can do right here is blockade the war machine with everything you have, like it's the last thing you'll ever do. So that's what I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarna. Yeah. Kaya, do you want to jump in?
Yes. And what was the question? This was leading on hope.
Solutions.
Solutions.
Yeah, a more
Okay.
sustainable future.
Solutions for a more sustainable future. I thought about this one. Land back. Returning the land to the stewards of the land. When people talk about like, oh, so Indigenous people are just gonna like rule over everything, like, and just like literally give the land back. I'm like, no, it's giving culture back. It's giving right to live back. It's giving freedom back. It's giving reciprocal ways of being back. It's so much more than just that. And I think, again, there was such a large diversity in cultures and languages, especially in the Coast Salish areas, as people are looking up like different cultures and different nations that they live on. There was a reason for that. There was a reason there was such a diversity, and there's such a diversity of languages, and because they were generally very anti-imperialist. It was very like live and let live. There were disputes, there were wars, but there were a lot of agreements as well. And I think that's a good model that we could learn from. I think there's Indigenous cultures all across the planet we could learn from. And it starts with reconnecting with your own and finding that the entire world at one point had really nature-based ways of being. and living, and just ways of existing and reciprocity. At one point, all of humanity knew how. Humanity isn't the problem. Capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, racism, all of patriarchy, all of those are the problem. Ignorance is the problem. But humanity, we have the solutions. We know them deep down inside, and we just have to look. And a good way to look is through the indigenous cultures, because I think it'll lead everybody back to theirs. We all have cultures. We all are a part of this earth. We all came from it. And when you look at indigenous cultures, make up 5% of the world's population, but hold 80% of the world's biodiversity. That's a good way of seeing. And again, I think every single person, even if you aren't living on your own territory, there's a way to reconnect with it. And there's a way to reconnect with the earth, because we all come from the earth. Yes.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I'm very biased because I am, well, living where I'm living, and I'm also growing up in a very white community. But the things that I have seen in the past 2.5 years, as far as the organization that USL has now become, has given me hope at the very least. It's been a lot of youth thinking big and thinking outside the box, and hopefully we can go even bigger, or support organizations that are going bigger, or take on things as we go out into the world. But it does all go back to those major foundations that we've been talking about kind of throughout this entire series, right? The patriarchy goes back into discrimination, it goes back into colonialism, it goes back into all of the things that have been discussed today, imperialism, etc. And hopefully we can all have that courage to go and push towards changing those systems, because so far it has seemed like such a scary thing to do and impossible to do because of the power that they hold. But unless we, the people in this room, the people beyond, start taking those efforts and pushing forward and hopefully uplifting voices, we're going to continue to be stuck. So thank you both so much for coming in and sharing your stories and your voices. It is so greatly appreciated. And hopefully we will continue to see you down the line. But yeah, thank you all for being here today. And we are 5 minutes away from 6:30. So if you do have questions, and I encourage anyone who has questions to stick around, please stay. But we're going to do a quick closing for the sake of this webinar. So remember to promote this series to friends and family. Again, we've covered a lot of the topics that were discussed in this webinar, but this one is one of the most important ones we've done. It is building up to and kind of enclosing all of those topics we've discussed already. So please share this with friends and family. Share what you've learned with the people around you. I know that I have learned many things today, and I will hopefully continue to use those in the future, as should you. And then hold each other accountable. That's one of the benefits of working in organizations and being around each other and listening to this together, is hearing what we've learned and continuing to hold each other to those teachings, but also growing and evolving and continuing to ask questions and continuing to learn more and open your minds. So thank you all so much for being here. Reminder that you can find us in USL and all of these things online. We have a YouTube that has all of these recorded. Please share them with people. We have a Facebook that sends out things. We have a Instagram that sends out periodical things as well. So please find us there if you haven't already.